I'm very grateful to ICJP for inviting me to take part in this very important event. I have recently published a book, or rather a collection of essays under the title Genocide in Gaza, Israel's Long War on Palestine. I think of it as my Irish book, and this for two reasons. The book was published by Irish Pages Press, and secondly, the book has a coda by the eminent Irish barrister Glenia Ní Crowley, who you'll remember was part of the South African delegation that made the case to the International Court of Justice in The Hague about Israel, charging Israel with genocide. And her speech went viral, and she very kindly agreed to allow us to print the text of her speech at the end of my collection of essays. Glenia made the case that Israel is guilty of genocide much more eloquently than I can, and she's a lawyer, whereas I am not. She made the point that the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide is more than a legal precedent. It is fundamentally about morality. Genocide is the denial of the right to exist of entire human groups, as homicide is the denial of the right to exist of individual human beings. Glenia also suggested that more is at stake in this war than the future of Gaza. The very reputation of international law hangs in the balance. In its ruling of January 2024, the ICJ found that there was a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza, and it ordered Israel to take a list of provisional measures to prevent genocide. Israel completely ignored the orders of the court. I must confess that I hesitated to use the word genocide in the title of my book. It seemed almost perverse to accuse a state of the Jews of committing genocide when it was the Jews who were the principal victims of the Nazi Holocaust. A couple of years ago, I published a book, an autobiography, under the title 3 Worlds, Memoirs of an Arab Jew, which is highly critical of Zionism and its attitude to the Jews of the East, to Arab Jews like myself, and like Rachel Shabi, who was here before. And I wrote that for all its sins, Israel has not been guilty of genocide. But the facts have changed, and therefore I have changed my opinion. The visual evidence about genocide is compelling. We see it every night, live streamed on our television screens. Another thing that is unusual about this genocide is that normally people who commit genocide try and conceal it, whereas in the case of Israel, the rhetorical evidence for genocide is overwhelming. And it's not just marginal groups or marginal individuals. It's the Israeli political elite, from the president to the prime minister, and a lot of politicians who openly declare the intention to destroy the people in Gaza, to make Gaza uninhabitable. I won't give you many examples, but there are endless examples of genocidal rhetoric in my book. I'll just mention one famous example of former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who said that Hamas are human animals. Now, history tells us that dehumanizing the enemy is, and I should say that Israelis dehumanize not just Hamas, but the entire Palestinian people. And history tells us that dehumanizing a whole people paves the way to genocide. So, is Israel actually committing genocide in Gaza? Let me start with the definition of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It defines genocide as the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, or religious group as such. The following acts constitute genocide. 1, killing members of the group. 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And 5th, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. In its assault on the people of Gaza, and I emphasize that the assault is not just on Hamas, but it's on the entire people of Gaza, the IDF abundantly meets the first 4 criteria. It has killed over 56,000 people in Gaza, 70% of whom are women and children. It has destroyed 70 to 80% of the houses and the civilian infrastructure. It has inflicted unbearable suffering on the population. It has displaced 90% of the 2.3 million people in Gaza, sometimes upwards of 10 times, and very often when Gazans obey the IDF instructions to move away from their houses, they get bombed and attacked and have their tents set on fire. Israel also uses, I should add, that the forcible removal of the forcible displacement of civilians is a war crime. Israel also uses starvation as a weapon of war. So Israel has been committing these war crimes on a daily basis for the last 20 months. Israel has destroyed or damaged 31 out of the 36 hospitals in Gaza. In addition, Israel has been committing the crime of scholasticide. Scholasticide is the systematic destruction of an entire educational system. Israel has damaged or destroyed 512 schools and all 12 universities in Gaza. This aspect of the war is of particular interest to me as an academic, and I have published an article in the Journal of the British Academy on scholasticide in Gaza. Israel does not meet the fifth criterion of the definition. It has not transferred children of the group to another group. But it has done something much, much worse. It has killed 18,000 children. It has turned 40,000 children into orphans. And it has given rise to a chilling acronym, WCNSF, Wounded Children, No Surviving Family. Statistics convey some of the horrors of Israel's genocidal attack on Gaza. But sometimes it is individual cases that stab you in the heart. And one example is Dr. Ala Al-Najjar, a pediatrician who works in the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. And one day when she was doing her job, she received the news that Israel had bombed her home and killed 9 out of her 10 children and wounded her husband. In the book, there is a section of photographs about children during the war in Gaza. There are horrific photographs, and this is indeed a war on children, and sometimes a photo tells more than 1,000 words. The preface to my book was written, the foreword to my book was written by Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, a very brilliant and courageous fighter for justice for all and for human rights, an outspoken critic of Israel who has written a series of really important reports for the UN. In her foreword, Francesca Albanese writes that what matters under international law is that specific criminal acts are committed with the intent to destroy the group as such. And she writes, genocide is the epilogue of a tragedy foretold. In other words, she anticipated this story to end with genocide. I did not. It never occurred to me that it ever reached this point, but she did. Why did she think it was a tragedy foretold? It's because she knows that Zionism is a settler colonial movement, and Israel is a settler colonial state, and the logic of settler colonialism is the elimination of the natives in order to take over the land and its resources. The main instrument of Zionist settler colonialism has been ethnic cleansing. In 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were made refugees. This is the Nakba, the catastrophe. But the Nakba is not a one-off event. It's a process. It's a process that continues to this day and has been hugely intensified on the West Bank. One of the Israeli war aims was ethnic cleansing of the enclave. And an Israeli government report was revealed, which showed a plan to depopulate Gaza. This hasn't happened because of Egyptian resistance, but it's still an Israeli aim, and one that is openly declared by the fascist members of Netanyahu's government, who want Israel to conquer the whole of Gaza, empty it of its inhabitants, and resettle Jews in the enclave. Having failed to carry out the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, Israel has resorted to genocide, to killing the people. And you may say that genocide is the last resort of the frustrated ethnic cleanser. Britain bears a historic responsibility for the tragedy of the Palestinians. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict was made in Britain. It was made by Britain because Britain issued 3 incompatible promises during the First World War, the most important of which is the Balfour Declaration of 1917. This declaration pledged support for the creation of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. A national home was a euphemism for a Jewish state. In 1917, the Jews were 10% of the population, and they owned 2% of the land. So the Balfour Britain enabled the Zionist movement to embark on the systematic takeover of the whole of Palestine, a process that continues to this day. The cornerstone of the British mandate in Palestine was to prevent elections until the Jews became the majority. And this only happened during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War as a result of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. I would argue that the current war in Gaza is a direct result of the Balfour Declaration. Today, Britain continues the almost blind support for Israel. It does so by offering Israel diplomatic protection, intelligence cooperation, and most importantly, arms supplies. So Britain is not just complicit in Israel's war crimes, it's an active partner in committing these war crimes, as of course is America on a much, much bigger scale. The Hamas-led attack on the 7th of October 2023 was roundly condemned as a terrorist attack, and inasmuch as it was directed against civilians, I also condemn that attack. This attack provoked this attack provoked a savage and sadistic response on the part of Israel. It led to the longest, deadliest, and most ruinous war in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. There are 2 conflicting narratives about the 7th of October. Israel's narrative begins on the 7th of October, but ignores the context, totally ignores the context, and the context is 56 years of Israeli occupation and oppression, and this is the most prolonged and brutal military occupation of modern times. That's the context. Israel, the Israeli narrative presents its people as innocent victims. It's repeated time and again by Israeli spokesmen and by the supporters like Keir Starmer that Israel has the right to defend itself. But this is not clear-cut. Under international law, there are only two conditions that authorize the use of military force. One, if there is a Security Council resolution authorizing the use of force, and two, if a state is attacked by another state. Neither condition applied in this case. Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself against people who are under its occupation. It's the people under occupation who have the right to resist, including the right to armed resistance. The truth of the matter is that almost the whole of Israeli society, with some exceptions, was unhinged by the surprise attack. And it unleashed a tsunami of anger and hatred of Palestinians. It created a feeling that Israel was now entitled to do anything it liked and that it was entitled to ignore international law and the UN. And moreover, that anyone who criticizes Israel for what it does is an anti-Semite. The Israeli propaganda machine went into an overdrive, spreading massive misinformation, lies, exaggerations, and outright fabrications, like the story about the 40 decapitated babies. Israeli spokesmen lie all the time. I listen to them very carefully, and it's very, very rare to hear an Israeli spokesman who speaks a word of truth. The mendacity of Israel's spokespersons fully matches the savagery of its army. The Western media relies far too heavily on the Israeli narrative of this conflict. Israel, of course, bans access to journalists to Gaza. So journalists are unable to verify the Israeli account of events. The BBC is particularly guilty of partiality towards Israel. It has excellent reporters, but cowardly bosses. It has been aptly described as lions led by donkeys. The Western media seriously underreports the Palestinian narrative, and it hardly reports at all the Hamas narrative. I am one of several experts who have helped a London firm of solicitors to make a petition to the Home Secretary to deproscribe Hamas. Hamas is the client of this firm, and the firm gathered a number of experts. Between us, we produced 24 reports amounting to 500 supporting evidence in support of the petition. The Home Secretary has 90 days to reply to our petition. The most significant report is by Dr. Musa Abu Marzouk, a high Hamas official. He gives the Hamas narrative, which was issued in a document in Arabic, but it was also translated into English, but it was never ever reported in the West. According to this narrative, Hamas sought to achieve specific military objectives in Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, with specific instructions to its combatants not to target women, children, and elderly people. Hamas admits that deviations from these instructions occurred, and it is prepared to cooperate with the International Criminal Court or any neutral international body in an independent and transparent investigation of what happened on that day. This position stands in sharp contrast to Israel's stubborn refusal to allow any independent investigation of the multiple war crimes committed by its army, and above all, the crime of crimes, genocide. Genocide takes different forms. The Holocaust is, of course, the most terrible example of genocide in the annals of human history. The Holocaust is often invoked to justify Israel's actions towards the Palestinians. No, it does not justify what Israel does. It's a form of moral blackmail. Yet, Israel's national identity is inextricably connected with the Holocaust. But since the Second World War, things have changed. In the Second World War, the Jews were the defenseless victims of Nazi Germany. Today, it's the Palestinians who are the defenseless victims of the Jewish state. Thank you for listening.